Welcome back to the show, friends. Today, I sat down in the studio with Lindsey Matthews, and this was a special podcast in many senses. Number one being that it was our first podcast where a mom sat here and did the whole podcast with me with the baby strapped to her, and thankfully, baby was very well behaved and slept like a little angel as we dived into all things motherhood. What really struck me about Lindsey was her grounded energy. She owns the fact up front that she's 40 years old with a 6-month-old baby, which puts her in this category of a geriatric pregnancy. But something oozes off her with her naturally undyed her wisdom, her youthful look, and her practical and hopeful insights around why she chose to step away from the birthing industry as we know it, hospital birthing, to pursue a home birth, and how it took her a long time to develop the courage and even desire or belief that that was a possibility for her, spending most of her life otherwise thinking that she didn't want to have children because of a near-death experience that put her in the hospital when she was a lot younger, that kind of deterred her from ever wanting to be in that environment again. And the belief that was inbuilt to that was birth happens in hospitals, therefore birth is not for me. And going through a journey of being a sports chiropractor and then serving as a doula and seeing through other people's experiences that birth can be something different, and then merging those skills from her chiropractic experience and her time spent as BirthFit instructor, which is really readying women for pregnancy emotionally, spiritually, physically, with strength training and honoring the cycles, and merging that with her understanding of the nervous system and polyvagal theory and feeling safe, put her in this position to consciously choose parenthood and then to see that to its end of a beautiful, wonderful, pain-free home birth. So it's just a really cool, inspiring story, one that challenges an awful lot of dogma that exists in our culture around birthing, around pregnancy, around how we heal, around how we get pregnant, fertility, around what we should or should not do when we are pregnant in terms of a movement perspective and training. So I think you're really going to enjoy this show. So join me, Lindsey, and baby Vera for this episode. Let's go. What's up, friends? Welcome back to the show. Lindsey, welcome back. She's bobbing away over there if you're watching on video, because we had a baby forced intermission because they're the boss around here. It's the first time baby's joining us on the podcast, so welcome, baby. Cutest podcast we've ever done. And now Lindsey's over there bopping on a medicine ball or Bosu ball or big inflatable yoga ball, many different names. But we were just getting into kind of your story and the motivation behind stepping away from birthing inside of the medical birthing system, if you want to call it. Tell me a little bit more about your thought process there, and tell me a little bit more about what you think the medical birthing complex gets wrong about birthing. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I think they get wrong the fact that they don't believe in birth. The medical industrial complex just does not believe in women and their bodies and the power that women have within their bodies. I've never once seen a birth in the hospital system where the doctors weren't trying to save, and I put that in quotations, they weren't trying to save the woman from something that they already created. So I think that's the biggest thing, is they just don't believe in birth. They think birth is a pathology and that women need to be saved. And I wrote this on one of my Instagram posts, like, I did not fear birth at all. In fact, like, I looked forward to it. I did not want somebody to come and save me. But going back to why I chose to birth outside the system is, I very much, probably similar to a lot of people that are listening, I grew up very standard American, middle-class American. You're laughing now. And I had a near-death experience when I was in 4th grade due to asthma, and I was in the intensive care unit. And since that, I started stepping further and further away from the medical system. And I think that was like one of my big forks in the road, choice points. And, so I had written off childbirth because I assumed it happened in the hospital. But fast forward, when I became a doula after, a a few clients had talked me into it, attending their births, I realized I was awakened. I had unlearned things. And I was like, oh my gosh, you can give birth outside of the hospital. It could be at a birth center. It could be at your home. Wow, this is cool. And so that's when my wheels were turning. And then I was like, okay, I can have a family, because I had written that off. I was like, okay, if having a family meant birthing in the hospital, then I don't know about that. Just because I had such a negative experience in the hospital and with medicine, pharmaceuticals growing up. I was, on antibiotics from a very young age, steroid inhaler due to asthma, allergies. But my parents, they did the best they could with what they had, so that was my unlearning, was actually observing birth and being a part of women's births outside of the hospital system. And so I knew from basically that moment on, it was around 2011 when I became a doula, that I wanted to have a family and I wanted to birth at home. And so that started me down the rabbit hole, the rabbit hole.
And the rest, as they say, is history, or unfolding history in the next generations, which is so beautiful. And I think you hit a few points that my wife and I have been on this journey too, as many other women that have gone on this same journey. It's funny, right? You don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
And you were saying I'd written this off to its end conclusion. It is not for me because it has to happen in the hospital. I remember telling some of my friends what we were planning for birth, which was wild, free, at home. And some of them said, isn't that illegal? Can you do that?
Yeah, totally. Like when you start to explore the free birth route, I've had it's funny what people are like, did you get permission for that? That's basically what they're asking.
Yeah, right.
And it's like,
from who?
It's my body. It's my baby. It's my birth experience. It's wild. The other thing I wanted to say was the United States has a pretty terrible maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate. Like, we are one of the worst for industrialized countries. And when you actually start to educate yourself and look at the numbers and look at the facts of what's going on in childbirth in America, it's terrible at best. And when I looked at the numbers, I was like, oh, why would I repeat the same thing? Like, it's that quote, like, why do you keep repeating the same thing and expect a different result? It's like we're sicker, women are dying, children are dying. So why would I go inside a system or engage in those processes that really aren't doing any good? So I was like, that gave me the data, I guess, too. So why are we not looking at, how children are brought into this world? Because obviously we've looked at gut health, we've looked at, environmental. So I keep going back. And the whole, basically from preconception, pregnancy, and the first year of a child's life, a human's life, is there's the most influence, exponential neurodevelopment that's happening. And there's a guy by the name of Michel Odent, and I don't know if you came across his research when y'all were digging in, but he's a French OB. He's like in his 90s now. Wow. Straight up G. Like, he can recite every research thing he's ever done. And I had the opportunity to be in a room probably about this big with him and probably 20 other birth workers in Los Angeles and just ask him questions. But he started something called the Primal Research Database, and he's basically researched this known as the critical period in humans, where this period has the most profound effect on our health later on in life. So why are we still doing the same dumb shit, for lack of a better word?
No, for real.
Hopefully you can cuss on this podcast, because I just did. Sorry, Vera. But it's like that critical period needs to be investigated, and nobody else really was researching it besides him and then the chiropractic world. So that's kind of where
the worlds collided.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And we were talking off air, and I've talked about this on the podcast before. My wife had a C-section the first time, and then a free pregnancy and wild birth the second time. So the most kind of
full
most
spectrum.
opposite. Yeah, full spectrum. And just even thinking energetically and the experience of how Jai, my firstborn, came into the world and how Indy, my second, came in, the energy, who was around, the bright lights, the sterile hands, the clean the baby as soon as possible, the cord clamping, like everything versus this much slower, natural, calm, relaxed,
peaceful,
loving, peaceful, blissful, powerful, on and on and on you go. What was that experience like for you? Because I know it changed you, because I know it changed my wife, and I know that if women get to have that birthright and they reclaim it, it's transformative. I'm curious on your story.
I think, well, first of all, I truly believe that any woman can have the birth she desires.
Yeah.
And I should say, and it starts with lifestyle practices even before conception. Starts with digging in the personal development cobwebs, you know, going through all of that stuff. And I think starting BirthFit was literally my journey, my 10-year preconception journey to get to this space. Because like we were talking about, I had such a awesome birth. Like, it was not painful, it was blissful.
Wow.
People were like, wait, what? You birthed at home and it wasn't painful? No, I would do it again in a heartbeat. And it was like a drug. So I love to say, if I wasn't 40, I would have 10 more.
Yeah.
Like, it was the best drug I've ever had.
Yeah.
But I truly believe that birth is not designed to be painful. It's designed, like you just said, it's children, humans are supposed to come into this world peaceful, in a loving environment, a caring environment, not one that's abusive. And I really think the hospital setting is abusive. And, you know, that might freak some people out, trigger some people, but like you said, the shiny objects, the lights, the sterile environment, picking up the baby, moving the baby without the baby's permission, you know, not even acknowledging that baby is a human being. It's just, they just treat it as an object. And then there's protocols and processes in the hospital where it's like, okay, let's give them the eye ointment. Let's do the injections. Let's do the poisons, you know, all that stuff. And without a thought of how does that baby feel in that moment. So that was the biggest thing for me. There was a book, and I cannot remember what book this was, but it started, it was like through the baby's point of view, and the baby was describing how the first hour was. And it was just so beautiful, because the baby was like, I entered the world and it was dim, and I smelled my mom. She was talking to me, you know, and just, like, that just sounds great for a nervous system. Like, that sounds nourishing. So my dream birth was to have her outside. And I don't know why, but I love being outside. And all during pregnancy, I walked, I hiked probably minimum 2 miles a day. And we live out in Wimberley, so there's easy access to things like that out there. And I literally worshiped the sun. I was pregnant majority of the hot summer here in Texas, so I probably lived in a swimsuit or a sports bra, but it just felt natural. Like, and I definitely think now more so than ever that the sun is a direct portal with God. And I could just feel it beaming down on my belly. So we always ask women in our community and our birth education, you know, what's the birth you desire? What do you see for your birth? What do you envision? And many women have never even thought about it. They're like, we'll just see what happens. You know, no, put that out there, like, just like you would another goal. Like, see it. See yourself in that moment. And so what I kept seeing was, you know, on our back porch, under the stars, and in a tub, and we didn't have a tub at the time, but that's what I kept seeing. And so I told my husband, and he was like, okay, let's make it happen. He built a deck out there. We got a tub off Amazon. He put it up the day of the birth. And she came into this world 1:24 a.m., August 27th, after a few hours of labor. And it was underneath the Texas stars, like, you know, a hot night in Texas. It was awesome. but I will say it didn't, like, it could have easily gone, I could have made a choice out of fear instead of love. And that's another phrase we use is, when you're at these forks in the roads or these choice points in your pregnancy and your birth experience or postpartum, are you making choices out of love and not fear? Because like it's easy, like you can get scared into choices, fear-mongered into choices, especially if you're birthing inside the system. And my water started leaking at 36 weeks. And, for some, they're like, oh my God, that's early, whatever. But I wasn't scared. Never was I like, oh shit, we should go to the hospital. We had to recreate our birth team, reformulate our plan. But, never once was I scared. Never once was my husband scared. And, it's interesting because you mentioned one of my mentors, Yolanda, before this. And it was probably my second trimester. I did a video call with Yolanda and we were just chatting. And I asked her, and for those of you that don't know or follow Yolanda, Bow Housewife on Instagram, she's like literally the pioneer of free birth. She just gave birth to her 10th baby.
At like 42?
42, 43, free birthed, all of them. And so that's who I kept in my corner, you know? And I think this matters, and we can talk about team in a minute, but I was asking her on that video call, what's the earliest you would free birth? Or would you go to the hospital if baby was born early? I don't know why I asked that question. It just came out of my mouth, which is wild. And she was like, well, we wouldn't go to the hospital for any reason. And, generally 35 women in the community have done 35 weeks, 36 weeks, and babies are fine. I said, okay, cool. So after that is when my husband and I had some real conversations about life and death, birth and death. Like, where would we be okay dying? And I think you have to have those conversations around birth. Because if you don't, and you don't recognize that death is as much part of the conversation of birth, it's very naive. It's kind of, you're not doing yourself any favors. So we had both agreed, similar to Yolanda, that there was no reason for us to go to the hospital. My husband's faced death before, being a Marine. He's looked at straight in the eyeballs. And like I shared earlier, I had a near-death experience when I was in grade school. So we both were, I feel like for average Americans, pretty comfortable with death. And so fast forward, when my water started leaking, I was like, I feel good. He was like, okay, yeah, you look good. You don't look, no infection, nothing. I hadn't done any ultrasounds. I hadn't done any internal exams, no group strep B. I literally a wild pregnancy, but had a midwife standby. And I knew if I went to the hospital, first of all, I'm 40. They would risk factor. They would have labeled me GBS because I didn't take the test. So they would have wanted an antibiotic. And then waters breaking early is another risk factor. I knew, my husband knew, that they would have whisked her off to NICU right away. And that's not what we wanted.
No.
And so we decided, okay, we're either going to find a CNM, a certified nurse midwife. Side note, because in the state of Texas, CNMs can attend out-of-hospital births at 36 weeks compared to a CPM, a certified professional midwife, which cannot due to their licensing. So we decided, worst case scenario, we'd want to be at our house. Best case scenario, we'd want to be at our house. And he was like, I could not imagine seeing somebody whisk my baby off or my wife off and me having to decide who to go with. And the house was the best place for us. So when my water started leaking, we got on the phone with another mentor of mine, Dr. Stu Fishbein, and he has a podcast called Birthing Instincts. And he's kind of amazing. He's an out-of-hospital OB who practiced all in Southern California, recently moved to Utah. But by default, he has experienced a lot of, I'll say, out there births, from breech to multiples out of the hospital. And his C-section rate is still like 5%. So he's been awesome, mentor of mine. I'm able to learn from him. We got him on the phone that Friday night, FaceTime. Dr. Stu, what do you think? And he basically said, you know, you can go a whole week with your water leaking, which I knew this stuff, but just to hear it again, I was like, okay. And then for my husband to hear it from somebody that's attended thousands of births was awesome. And he said, you'll probably go into labor, you know, within 2 to 4 days. I'd be surprised if you still were pregnant by Monday. And this was Friday. It's like, okay, cool. So we better get stuff ready.
Yeah.
So literally that Friday night, labor started. I was like moving around, contractions, could sleep. And then Saturday morning, I took a walk. Saturday afternoon, I had my acupuncturist come over. She did some stuff. And then basically that night, things started picking up. Took some homeopathies. I did a castor oil shake because we were like in the throes of it, and it'll tip you one way or another.
Yeah.
But I couldn't stomach the whole thing. It was, but labor was just picking up. And I would say active labor probably started around 8 p.m. and she was born by 1:24 a.m. And I will, like, there's a point, like women will say this, there's a point where you're like, I don't know if I can do this, or it's hard. And I was sitting on the toilet, and most people in the birth world will call it the dilation station. And because you're like relaxed. And that's where I was like, oh God, the hospital is like 45 minutes away if I wanted an epidural. Which is also good. Like, set yourself up for success.
Yeah.
Like, but I started thinking about, and this was really cool, I remembered all the women that had come before me, all the women that I had been fortunate enough to observe and seen them in their power. And so I just would channel Ashley, Leah, Kat, you know, anybody. Okay, next contraction, who am I channeling? And I, like, that gives me the chills still. Like, it was every BirthFit woman I've ever worked with. And then you just take ownership. Like, there's no room for victim mentality in birth. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned, and that Yolanda's taught me, and that it carries over into life. Like, you get to embrace this next contraction. You get to breathe your baby down. You get to be the mother to this child. You get to nurse your baby. You get to be up at the all, you know, weird hours and cry with your baby and, you know, all that stuff. Like, this is an opportunity, embrace it. So that was a little bit about our birth story and the rabbit hole. I don't know where we were going with it.
It's incredible. You mentioned so much there. I think if there's a theme wedded or weaved through all of that, it's like a word of like trust and surrender, right? You have to surrender, because that's, in a sense, that's acceptance. I think what you're describing, and I love that you brought up the victim consciousness, and victims are often in resistance too. So you feel that next contraction coming in, instead of saying, okay, let's pull in energy and let's breathe. It's like, oh, no. And then that makes it way worse, right? Because you're trying to fight. It's going to be
anyway. Painful. Yeah.
It's coming. So you better get
ready. Whether you like it or not, it's there. Yeah. And the contractions are a part of you. They're not bigger than you. They're literally in your body. Yeah. You're making them happen. Like, your physiology is making them happen, which is super cool. Yeah, it's really cool. And like you said, even when you have these deep conversations with your husband and you stir something as scary as the D word in the face, death. And I heard Bobby Kennedy say recently, there are things scarier than death. Yeah. And the things that are scarier than death is kind of living as a prisoner to your own fears or your limits, or the regret that maybe if you'd have fallen to your lower self in that moment and let the fear win, because you didn't have the trust and you didn't have the mentors, that you could quickly see where that would go. And it would probably have ended with you on the operating table with the C-section, and you know, feeling not your best about that, because there's a part of you that maybe guilt. Knows like, man, I could have done that if I'd have known better. And that's why it's really important to not, you know, blame and shame people that have had that experience. My wife had that experience. Like, when we know better, we do better. And you said the importance of team, and you had a lot of good people in your corner. But you've also, seems like you were saying with BirthFit, you've been
either virtually or in person on many people's teams too throughout their journeys. And the fact that you were able to come full circle there and like bring some of those images in and channel those women so you could push through and find that extra strength is really powerful.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing the story.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious to take us on the journey of BirthFit a little bit more, as we've already teased it out. What is it? What do you do with BirthFit? How do you empower other mothers to find this team and sense of strength and empowerment, physical health, and everything else that comes with it?
Yeah, so BirthFit started in 2013 as a blog. And it was literally just me sharing my experience as a chiropractor, working at 2 different birth centers in Los Angeles, being a doula, and being, at the time, a CrossFit coach, a strength and conditioning coach at a gym called Deuce Gym in Venice, California. And what I saw was a huge gap in the fitness, nutrition, birth, chiropractic, nervous system world. There are huge misconceptions, about CrossFit. There are huge misconceptions about nutrition. Like, people were thinking the vegan diet was the best thing for pregnancy. Lord. And then thinking too much exercise is a bad thing for birth. So at the time, when I started, the biggest recommendation was literally Kundalini yoga, and that was it. So what I hoped to do was say, like, intentional training, nervous system supported, intentional strength and conditioning, where you're training in all planes of motion, because birth happens in all planes of motion. So where each training day looks like a polyvagal theory sandwich. And I don't know if you all know about the polyvagal theory, but it's literally the social engagement theory. Do we feel safe or not? And when we feel safe in our body, that's when we can conceive. That's when, first of all, when we ovulate, when conception happens, when our cervix opens for birth, when we're able to produce more milk. So literally each of our training days is a polyvagal theory sandwich. But that was the gap. I wanted to dispel misconceptions about too much fitness. Okay, is it really too much fitness, or is somebody training in one plane of motion? Working out, using more than 15 pounds. This little thing weighs 20 pounds. Like, I'm crushing weightlifting, literally diaper bag, 20 pounds. Like, you're lifting more than 15 pounds almost immediately after birth. And then the heart rate thing was another big misconception. And heartbeats per minute varies from individual to individual based on training, sleep, stress, nutrition, yada, yada, yada. So, if both of us were to walk up a set of stairs, it's going to be different. So that's when I started utilizing heart rate variability. And people always asked, how do you monitor? And that was the big thing back in the day. People wanted to know give it credibility. Yeah. And I said, well, intuition and HRV. And just like the Whoop started coming out, Garmin watches or different watches could track HRV. And then in the chiropractic world, there's a type of scanner called the Insight scanner that monitors HRV. So this stuff was just taking off. So I gave kind of parameters around that. If your heart rate's trending in an up direction, or your HRV's trending in an up direction, great. Because the HRV is literally the range of motion of your nervous system. How adaptable, how resilient is your nervous system? And just like the range of motion of a shoulder or a hip or whatever, you want your nervous system to be adaptable, have a greater adaptability. So the higher the trend, the better. If it's trending down, then today might not be such a good day to go hard in the paint, to do a Metcon. Maybe just do the warm-up, the mind-body connection piece, which is at the beginning of our training days. Just do that and then go for a walk. So the goal was to fill this gray area. And then, women, I didn't know I would be doing this for life.
Yeah.
Like, literally. So I would get awesome messages like, okay, your words helped me during labor, or the training, like the interval training and thinking about the rest periods, like, because even in our rest periods, it's like, okay, what do you see yourself doing in labor? Okay, swaying your hips, bending over, tabletop. Practice those in the rest periods,
right.
I spent most of my labor in tabletop. Like, thank God I had arm strength. Like, that's amazing. So most of the training will talk about birth education or some sort of resemblance to labor. And now, BirthFit's evolved. It started with just classes. I was coaching postpartum classes. And that was literally my first class in person. And the reason I started with postpartum was I blew out my ACL. And long story short, I knew exactly what to do for ACL rehab. Surgery, you're in the thing, bending your knee, you know what you're doing 2 weeks later, 3 months later, 6 weeks later, a year later. You take these women, like your wife that had a C-section, major abdominal surgery, they're given no rehab. There's no universal postpartum care in our country. She's not even given a script for a PT. You know, C-section, vaginal birth, every birth in between on the spectrum, they're given the same thing. Show up at 6 weeks, we'll check you out, you're cleared for sex and exercise. Well, most of the time, women are like, okay, I'll just ease back into running, or I'll just ease back into CrossFit or Orange Theory or triathlons or swimming or whatever it is they were doing. There's no ground level foundational work. And that's what I started with BirthFit through the postpartum series. Excuse me. And now everything's online, unless you're working with a BirthFit coach, but it's called the BirthFit Basics postpartum program. And you can get these for free. We put all the BirthFit Basics moves for free on YouTube.
Amazing.
Because they're that important. It's 15 movements and poses. And they're based on developmental kinesiology. So how a small human learns to move and build upon their movement milestones in this world, that's what these BirthFit Basics movements and poses are based on.
Cool.
And one of the biggest reasons why is because babies are freaking good movers, and all babies are born with diastasis, the ab separation. But it approximates as they go through their developmental milestones and they start to incorporate the different anatomical slings, which is kind of rad. So literally, postpartum mom is doing the same movements as baby in that first year.
It's a cool, like, full circle image that you go back to, almost like envisioning yourself learning those building blocks again, and it fixes the things that the mother wants to fix after birthing as well. Really cool.
And the postpartum experience can be such a blank canvas, an opportunity, and that's what we try to incorporate or put in women's minds. It's like, hey, we're not bouncing back. We're a completely different version of ourselves. And men don't get this opportunity to reset, recalibrate, but we do. And so we embrace a slow is fast mentality and just get super intentional on the rehab. So that was the first class. And then I made the prenatal series. And then I started teaching seminars a year later in 2017. And I taught a BirthFit coach seminar and a professional seminar. I've dropped the professional stuff, stuck with the coach stuff. But literally that year, for the first 2 years, I was teaching 2 seminars a month, probably average, and they would sell out at 30 people. That's about what I could do. And just the stories, like you were talking about in the beginning, the stories were freaking awesome. And it's amazing. Like, social media is evil in some ways, but in other ways it's quite remarkable that it connects and we're able to share stories like this. So that's literally what kept me going is, you know, every woman, every family's story. Dads, partners, husbands would reach out to me. I've had somebody on the airplane stop me and say, my wife birthed in power because of you.
Oh, wow.
I was like, what? Like, that's awesome.
That is really awesome. Yeah. And just thinking about, like, it's hard to probably wrap your head around those numbers, because even just in the seminars, that's like well over 1,000 people a year. Then the online reach, and then the programs.
I'm so bad at tracking.
But it's like a lot of people. Like a lot of people that you've managed to touch in potentially, and I would argue, the most crazy rite of passage moment of their lives, that like in some way, shape or form you had your hand in that. It's really cool, you know, and then now you've got to relive your version of that as well. It's
really freaking cool. And like I was sharing with you before, my chiropractic journey, I was going down like the sports med rehab route, And I had a sweet gig. Like I was traveling the world with professional athletes and actors doing stunts, but it wasn't fulfilling me.
Yeah.
And I loved being on the sidelines and being support, but it wasn't until I attended my first birth and I was on the sideline for that woman birthing in her power. I was like, oh, this is my Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
This is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
This is her Super Bowl, her Olympics, her CrossFit Games, whatever you want to call it. I'm her support team. And I just loved it.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, and you got to know if something speaks to you, that you also have to have the courage to walk away from something that is good to potentially step into something that is great, and to just listen. You know, that life is guiding you with these little nudges and cues sometimes. Oh, totally. You got to be open to listen to them. You know? I do have a couple more questions. So I'm really interested in the chiropractic stuff, but on the BirthFit program, and I think like to hear the arc of the journey of focusing a lot at the postpartum and now going like the prepartum and the prep. I think a lot of women do probably put their attention there, right? They don't think as much about the getting ready for pregnancy. It's all like after the baby comes, then I'll fix stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So a lot of like pelvic floor work and things like that. How different is it, the prep style work versus the post-recovery style? What fundamental differences or what fundamental pillars are you focusing on to get ready to birth too, not just to rehab from birthing?
Well, I wouldn't say the pillars are different.
Right.
They're just employing different parts of them, you know? Which is kind of cool. And I was mentioning earlier that all this starts prior to conception. So, you know, the nutrition, the lifestyle habits, the relationship you have with yourself, with your God, with your partner, your boyfriend, husband, whoever. You have to have those conversations before. And, you know, there's a ton of free ways that you can start to get healthy. And I'm sure y'all have talked about this. Heck, go listen to Kaylee's episode.
Yes.
But literally just slowing down. And I think this was a big one. This is, in fact, is a huge one. When women come see me in the office still, this is probably the number one piece of advice. It's like, slow down. Do you think you're going to change when that baby gets here? Or do you want to make room for that baby now? You know, so slow down, get the morning sun, go for a walk. Like, that's going to nourish your nervous system. I would say our society has a real issue with down regulating and doing nothing. So embrace that. Like, that's huge. I really feel like nursing is a constant reminder to me to slow down. You know, it's a nice pause wherever we are. And you heard her earlier, like she's going to make me pause whether I want to or not. That's
right.
But nutrition, lifestyle practices, fitness, I do believe, obviously, there's a baseline level of fitness that is needed. Because as we mentioned, the birth happens in all planes of motion. It's a dance between mom and baby. Side note, I'm one of these chiropractors that doesn't believe in malposition. Like, there's chiropractors that believe malposition baby, or your labor was long because it was OP. It's a dance. You know, we got it. Mom dance with baby, baby dances with mom. We work together. Nobody needs to save anybody. But fitness, I do believe that they're like, are you able to walk 1 to 3 miles a day? Can you do the BirthFit basics? Can you do 20 squats a day? And then I feel like there's, with the strength and conditioning, 2 days a week minimum. 4 days a week is probably enough. You know, if they're an elite level athlete, for example, let's bring them back down from 7 days a week to 4 days a week and utilize swimming, hiking, walking, a 20-minute lunge session just at a conversational pace. Chill out on the Metcons, you know.
Yeah.
And then the biggest thing, training in all planes of motion. Because a lot of the times with runners or even CrossFitters, they train in that sagittal plane, and there's nothing beyond that.
Yeah.
So then hip flexors are tight, and psoas, and the psoas is like the root of kind of a ton of emotions. But also, if you're thinking about the psoas inside the pelvis, it's like the bumper plates on like if you're bowling, and they're going to help direct baby into pelvis. So if one side's tighter than the other, or if both are tight, it's going to be hard for a baby to descend. If one's tighter than the other, it's going to be a little asymmetrical. So within our training, we focus a lot on balance, front to back, side to side as well. So I think training, nutrition, lifestyle practices, those all show up, mindset, nourishment, throughout each season, but in various different degrees. Whereas, let's say in pregnancy, the training is different than preconception. You know, it's all about balance. In preconception, I'm training more with my cycle and honoring the different phases of my menstrual cycle.
Would you be able to expand on that a little bit more, this training in sync with your cycle? Because it's really fascinating for me to learn about as a guy, but I think this is a popular topic that's emerging now because so many women are realizing they were never told this stuff. No,
I know. Well, yes, let's talk about it. So I'll try to give something little quick and easy. Day one of your cycles, day one bleed. So if you're male coach, female coach, whoever's listening, just know that. That's where we start. That's also the start of your follicular phase. The cycle's broken up into follicular, luteal, with ovulation in the middle. However, we like to think of the menses, the bleed, as the first phase, and then the follicular phase, and then ovulation, and then luteal. So usually, day 1 through 3 of bleed is more of a time to go inward, reflect. Women naturally probably feel like, I don't feel like doing a sprint workout today, or going heavy, like 5x5 back squat sounds like a nightmare, or I don't know, pushing it in the gym. It's more of like a yin yoga day. As you get past that third day, sometimes fourth day, your energy starts to ramp up as estrogen rises. And now you're entering that follicular phase. Bleeding may still be happening, but your energy's getting up there, and you're starting to approach that ovulation season. And if we're thinking about seasons in general, menses is more like winter. Ovulation, or the follicular phase, is more like spring. Ovulation's more like summer. Luteal phase is more like fall. So ovulation, we're like, okay, let's go for this. Let's go hard in the paint. Luteal phase, I like to think in 2 different chapters, where it's like, okay, you can still push yourself as you come down that like mountain from ovulation, but then on the back half of the luteal phase might be more of a time to like rest or like listen to your body. I know for me, it's like, okay, I would push myself. If I would get lazy, it'd be like, I don't want to work out today. I would look at my cycle. Okay, we're still in, pretty close to ovulation. Just show up. You'd feel better afterwards. But the second half, like, I'd be usually 2 to 3 days close to my bleed. Honor that. Slow down. Go inward. It's okay to skip leg day. So that would be your cycle. Cool. Training with your cycle is really important also in the sense of giving yourself downtime. So some women that come to me with, I call it fertility obstacles. They're usually like go, type A. And they might need more lengthening of the follicular phase because they're burning all their energy on the workouts rather than using their energy to cultivate and build quality eggs. They might need to lengthen their luteal phase and generate more progesterone in their body, which I'm sure Kaylee talked about on the episode.
Loves progesterone. Yeah. We love it now too. Let's go
Zen
progesterone.
Hormone. Progesterone's so important, and many women in our country are so depleted of it. If you've ever been on the pill, you're depleted of it. So training with your cycle is super important, especially, I would say, a year prior to conception, because then you're starting to live in harmony, to surrender to something greater than you, and living in that flow, which helps during pregnancy, helps during postpartum. Women are just on a different flow than men, which is wild. So that would be like, if you wanted to train with your cycle with BirthFit, you would sign up for the monthly membership option. We have tons of videos, content, PDFs that you would get access to, and you are responsible for your body, your training, and you would go from there. But yeah, it's in there. It's fun.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I just love this message of honoring the cycles, honoring nature's wisdom, the intelligent design. It's like for a reason. It's like it's
smarter than us.
One of Kaylee, we keep saying Kaylee. If you haven't watched Kaylee's episode, you should go back and watch Kaylee's episode. But Kaylee had this cool line where she said, we treat our fertility like an inconvenience. Yeah. And then when we decide, okay, I'm ready to get pregnant now, I'll just switch it back on.
Absolutely.
And that training thing is a big part of it. Living in this go society, this kind of like masculine fast culture, when you're ignoring the signals of that slowing down, that intuition, that womb space of creation and nourishment. Because I guess we've just been ingrained to believe that's maybe it's bad, or maybe it's just like it's not sexy, right, to slow down and look after yourself a little bit more, but it requires that nourishment. And I think in those spaces is where you'll really develop and deepen that relationship with yourself. Like at the beginning of the call, you said something that's really important for this birth story is getting up in here in the brain and detangling the cobwebs. And how are you going to do that if you never stop and you never slow down and you never listen, and it's just all snatches and burpees and go and then working 60 hours a week and coffee and wine and you name it, it's kind of crazy, right? So I really appreciate that little explanation there, because it's super helpful.
Well, it teaches women, I think, that surrender is one of the biggest practices of discipline. And surrender is often looked at as, something passive or weak, when it's absolutely not. It takes great strength. So surrendering to a flow that's bigger than you, a power that's bigger than you, a God that's bigger than you, that's what's absolutely needed for the motherhood transition. Yeah,
I love that. I want to shift gears into chiropractic for a little bit, because this is fascinating to me. But I want to throw this to you first and say, what do you think most people misunderstand or get wrong about chiropractic?
Oh, that it's just a bone out of place.
Right.
So, there's a real big resurgence of chiropractic right now, and I love being a part of it. And I feel like it's starting with the pediatric world, because moms are fed up, like we were talking about earlier, with their sick kids. They're getting no answers in the conventional, traditional medicine, pharmaceutical world. And so they're turning to the alternative route. They do all the gut health, the supplements, the essential oils, whatever. And then they find chiropractic. They've tried everything else out, but their kid still has sensory issues. Their kid still has seizures. And you come into a nervous system-based chiropractor that does the insight scans, and we look at HRV, we look at thermography, we look at EMG, which is looking at how the nervous system functions to the muscles and the organs and the surrounding tissue and musculature. And you find, what we find on our scans is basically where the primary subluxation is. And that means, misalignment. But misalignment of the nervous system that's basically interfering with the others downstream from it. So, the nerves that are exiting, basically C1, talk about the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the biggest cranial nerve in the body, and it goes and innervates the face, and then it goes all the way down, gut, digestion, respiration, and it even touches the cervix. This cranial nerve, which the polyvagal theory is based on, social engagement theory, do we feel safe in our bodies or not, starts with facial expressions. So, side note, what the hell do you think was happening with kiddos and seeing grown-ups in masks? What do you think was happening with women birthing in the hospital, where they couldn't even see their partner or husband with a mask on? They did not feel safe in their bodies. So, of course, that's going to reverse any physiological process in their body. They're not going to feel safe, so it's going to go into survival mode. Just had to go off on that tangent because that was bananas. And
survival is definitely not thrival, right? Surviving is not thriving, and I think that's a very important point.
You're not going to give birth. You're not going to conceive. You're not going to make quality eggs if your body's in survival mode. You're not going to make milk. So I got into nervous system based chiropractic, basically full circle. Like, it brings me back to the chiropractic philosophy. The power that made the body heals the body. And our body is so innately intelligent, and it is always working for us, working on healing. It's not working against it, against us. So, you know, a lot of women that have traumatic births are like, my body failed me. No, your body did exactly as it was trained to do in that moment for your survival. And that's a beautiful thing. You know, it did all it could to save you, to save baby, to, you know, put up a fight, literally. So with nervous system based chiropractic, we find the primary subluxations and we adjust those levels. And we focus on those primary subluxations until those are clear. We rescan, see how the nervous system has evolved, and we keep going from there. So the little difference is, and I've practiced both ways, you know, as a sports med chiro first. The frequency needs to be more because you're impacting the nervous system. And the adjustments are probably a lot less than, like, you walk into someplace like the Joint or wherever, and it's like, we call it the flying 7. You just adjust 7 different segments, rack them and crack them, and they're on their way. But like with kiddos, like, she had a primary of an occiput, which is CO, and that's all we adjusted on her twice a week for about 6 weeks. And then her primary changed. It was more thoracic lumbar junction. So now we focus on that. Every now and then her primary will show back up, but it's interesting. Her CO, which is like the occiput right above C1, that was her primary from birth. So it could have been how she was hanging out in the womb, whatever. But originally she preferred only one side for latching, and she had a favorite boob, and one boob was doing all the work. And I was like, I can't have one big boob and one small boob. Like, we got to figure this out. So, you know, things like that people don't even think about, but chiropractic can totally help with that. And like we were talking about, I do believe moms are changing the game. Moms are speaking with their dollars. They're birthing outside the system. They're looking for alternative health options for their kiddos because they know the Western medicine doesn't work.
The crunchy crusaders, as they might sometimes call themselves. If you're curious to find this group, you're looking for, they'll usually be in Facebook groups, like crunchy groups and things like that. My wife's the crunchy group lady, you know. But we've had some really interesting experience with chiropractors, and I wanted to speak to this because I think there's a lot of misconceptions. Like, firstly, torticollis was present in both of our kids, which was really helped by chiropractic.
Awesome.
My youngest son just right now is like teething, and that can cause some issues with the ears. And my wife said the other day, she took him to the chiro, and as she adjusted the baby, you could just literally see this look in his eyes that was just like, oh, thank you. And she's like, it was really cool to see. And even though she's seen this with both of our sons in different situations, that it's still really cool to see, because there's like just some stickiness around chiropractics. Like, people think it's just, oh, I'm not taking my baby to a chiropractor. What are they going to do? Snap the neck? So like, when you say adjustments, for the person that doesn't understand what that means, it's not always, like you said, rack 'em and crack 'em, right? There's other techniques.
A lot more gentle for babies. Like, most babies, I'll use either my pinky finger or like some part of my index finger or a little bit of my thumb. You know, with an adult, I'll use my whole body to adjust. With babies, you literally just, it's like you're putting a little pressure like you would the outside of a tomato. And that's so subtle. And babies are so adaptable, so resilient. They haven't had like the crap of life pile up on them, you know? So they're basically open to changing and adapting and shifting. The other thing, you hit on this, colic, and you know, so talking about some common things like colic, ear infections, you know, the torticollis. Think about this, like babies, this phrase I love, and it's from another friend of mine, Dr. Tony Ebel, who's behind the pediatric experience. And if you want a great chiropractor, look at pxdocs.com. But babies don't grow out of things like your pediatrician says. They grow into other things. So your baby that was colicky probably will grow into ear infections, probably will grow into allergies, probably will grow into ADHD, probably will grow into depression or any of those things, as a teenager. It's a vicious cycle that we have set up now in America. So if somebody ever tells you, if a professional ever tells you, oh, they'll just grow out of that, look at them and then run the other way. Like figure it out, get to the root cause.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the common things that maybe like more of the common childhood illnesses or things that people might not know chiropractic care can be a solution to? Like we mentioned a couple, like ear infections is a big one.
Ear infections is huge.
It's one of the only times, and I'm kind of like humble brag about this fact, but my children outside of the C-section birth, after that, he's only been to a doctor's office one time in his life. And it's because we knew something was going on with his ears. And of course, that doctor's opinion right there and then was, we got to, tubes or whatever. Yeah. And I was like, damn, that seemed to get aggressive really quickly. Well, lo and behold, when we tracked it in, he was having a cross reactivity to gluten through my wife's breast milk. She removed that, cleaned up a few things, and then took him to a chiropractor. And the chiro adjusted and was like, this kid doesn't need tubes at all. The fluid is gone. So that one's a big one. What else might parents otherwise not know? And they could try chiropractic care before stepping back inside of the well visit room, etc.
I mean, we've literally seen everything at our office. So I would say from birth, if the birth was traumatic, which birth is, even like my baby girl who had a peaceful birth, she still needed adjustments. If there's any issues around lactation, I feel like the tongue-tie diagnosis is, kind of rampant right now, and people get trigger happy to like laser and cut. Try chiropractic, try cranial sacral with chiropractic. That works wonders. Digestion issues. If your kiddo is not pooping, don't put them on Miralax, which is like a super common thing to do. Get them to the chiropractor.
On that note, because I couldn't really believe this, but recently I heard of a child that's a couple of years old that is having such a hard time with digestion that she's getting enemas.
Oh.
Like they're giving 2-year-olds.
That's going to be traumatic for it. Yeah.
And I don't know what
I do coffee enemas, but I'm an adult.
That's an adult, right? And that's a fun one. I'm yet to have the privilege of a coffee enema, but for research purposes, we may have to do it. We'll blur it out. But yeah, it's just like that again is just, that's where it went. It went to these, it was probably Miralax or something like that. And then that wasn't working. It's like, now you got to give this tiny little child and an enema, and it's
terrible.
Sad, and there's probably something else there that we could do before going to that extreme,
Absolutely. Yeah, digestion, ear infections, you named it, torticollis, colicky. I would say if they're having any issues with sensory or learning or movement and crawling, especially as kiddos like learn to crawl and embracing movement, if they're favoring one side, that's a big one. Because like our function, our movement's going to dictate our function, and our function's going to influence our movement both ways. And then there's so much like the T's, we call them the toxins, technology. God, I forget the rest of them now, but technology is a big one. And I was just thinking of teenagers and the phones and the screens. Like there's got to be limits on that. But if your kiddo is not interacting and not engaging with relationship or communicating, that's a red flag. So chiropractic can help. I was trying to think of one very autistic kiddo came in, symptoms like mom, I want to say this was probably 6 weeks, which is a pretty quick turnaround. They came in every day, Monday through Thursday, because those are our hours right now. Severely autistic, and she on his rescan, this was last summer, she said he's able to look me in the eyes now. And those kind of stories are far too common right now, but that's what like keeps me going in the chiropractic world. She's got 2 other kids, so she's not able to devote time equally, and he's requesting a ton of her time, but just to have your kid look you in the eye now is huge. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you said, I think it's moms that are doing this, because I'm sure she's probably been down the rabbit hole of all of the conventional ways to try and help this with the behavioral issues, with the eye contact issues and everything that comes with that. And almost as a exasperated last stop, it's like, well, let's try chiropractor. And then it's like, oh, damn, this is working.
Yeah. Why didn't I try this sooner?
Why didn't I try that sooner? And the stories are really empowering in that way.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's, if you ever want to go down the rabbit hole of looking at like the Rockefellers and
we love those guys, wink, wink.
and medicine in our country, the AMA, and how just things got started, you'll see like there was a big lobbying group against homeopathy, against chiropractic, and you know, similar in the nutrition world where fat is bad or meat is bad, like just takes a little bit of money thrown at marketing to sway the general public in one direction. And that's literally what Rockefellers did. And now the pharmaceutical companies basically teach the medical schools, teach the pediatricians. But similar to you, like she hasn't been to any well baby visits. Well baby.
Yeah,
like,
well baby is definitely an quote worthy, because if we have well babies, they shouldn't really need to be inside of doctors' offices, right? You know, taking our power back in that way is really an empowering and hopeful thing for parents to be able to know that they can do through good nutrition, good lifestyle practices, good support teams and care.
That's
everything.
what we talk about in BirthFit, is like you are the nourisher of your family, not you, but like the women, the mothers. You're the nourisher of your family. You're the medicine cabinet, the homeopathy, the whatever. So you have to take care of you. And that's why things like exercise, lifestyle practices are so important, so that you can trust your body and then take care and nourish your family. Yeah. Because nobody's going to love and nourish your family like you do.
No. I want to thank Vera firstly for being an incredible guest and napping this whole time. That was perfect. But I want to thank you. She'll watch this back one day, and you were famous. Look at that. The one thing I want to ask you about, just because it's something like you mentioned in terms of when you were weighing up what would happen if I transferred to the hospital, one of the first things they would have said is geriatric pregnancy, which is crazy, because you mentioned you're 40 years old. How do you reconcile that kind of messaging in our culture, that like there is a certain age where you're too old or you need extra help or you're high risk? And what's it like to be an older mom? How do you frame that? How do you just push against that and say no?
No, period. Well, personally, I know I'm healthier than I ever was. If I were to have given birth at 25, 28, after, you know, a lovely time in college at Texas A&M, drinking all the beers, I was inflamed, the whole body inflamed. It would not have been the same experience. So yeah, I do know personally I'm healthier than I ever was. And I think, you know, it's a limiting belief that the medical system has placed upon women, and we can either choose to accept it or not, and I choose not to accept it. Our eggs don't expire at 35 years old. You don't just suddenly become geriatric at 35 years old. We have the ability to continue to make eggs, just like men continue to make sperm. I don't know why or where that notion or that idea, it got thrown out and then used a lot, that, okay, you just expire.
Yeah, it's like that. If you repeat a lie enough, it just becomes a truth kind of thing, right?
Yeah, totally. And like, there's so many misconceptions in the birth world. And I think they're literally designed to, take away women's power. And it's unfortunate. And that's one of them. You know, I think women can give birth, can get pregnant, as long as they have a healthy cycle. Yeah. That may be 45, that may be 48. You know, one of my early doula clients, or doula months, I should say, this was like second year of being a doula. I had 3 clients, and this was in May, and all of them were over 40, and they had all conceived naturally. Yeah. And I was like, wow. One from a one-night stand, another from, a marriage, and another from a boyfriend. So it was all different scenarios. But like, they just showed me that you could live your life, be healthy, and So that was on my radar.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of knew, like, okay, once I gained all the educational stuff, it was time for me to get pregnant. Like, in God's timing, it would happen. And then I didn't consume any education while I was pregnant. I just literally read Yolanda's book, Portal, and game on, surrendered.
Yeah. Divine timing.
Yeah.
I love it. It's really good. And I think you're right. I appreciate you sharing that message too, because as you're speaking, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a client of mine a couple of weeks ago who was 40, who just conceived naturally, who sat across the table from her doctor a couple of weeks ago, who was a man, who said to her these words: if you try to go full term, you will give birth to a stillborn baby because of your age.
Dick.
And I wanted to say, where is that guy's office? Because I'm going to go like kick his door down and say, you have no right to say that.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
It's so rude.
And this is a healthy woman. She conceived naturally. Like, the fact that people say this, like,
Find
these are our
doctor.
medical possession. And she fired him, thankfully.
Good.
So I hope you don't experience that.
Well, we could talk about, I'm sure Kaylee talked about this, but like the whole fertility industry is a money-making business.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, side note, if you're 35 or older, 25 or older, have these conversations with your partner, like, how far down the rabbit hole do we want to go?
Right.
As, you know, for support conception wise. And for me and my husband, we decided, no, we're not going to go into the assisted reproductive technology route, IVF, IUI.
Mm-hmm.
If it happens, it happens. We met each other later in life, and, you know, it was just divine timing, and it all worked out. But we decided we're not going to do that. We're going to live our life as healthy as possible. And if it happens, it happens, great. But none of these fertility clinics, half of them don't even do thyroid panels.
Mm-hmm.
There's no lifestyle suggestions. There's no exercise suggestions, no nutrition, none of it. And, you know, put them on a Weston A. Price diet, put them on raw milk. Oh my God, we didn't even talk about organs. Yes, get them on organs. We didn't even talk about raw milk.
Yeah.
But side note, like, when we first met, we got pregnant right away and then had a miscarriage, which is a beautiful, messy learning experience. But that's literally when I was healthy, but then I got like
dialed,
deep healthy.
Yeah.
And that's when I started consuming raw milk every day, twice a day. So I started eating raw organs, making sure organ capsules were in my diet if they weren't. But like, nutrition is such a big part of it, and these fertility clinics don't even go there. They're just ready for that dollar.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
And this is like all the motivation for having you and people like Kaylee and other rad moms doing radical things.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is radical in the sense that it's a middle finger to the way it is being perpetrated right now, or perpetuated right now. So it is radical, and it's awesome. And I appreciate you sharing all of that. And this is how I think we change something like this. It's a grassroots movement. It's not going to come from the top down now. These systems are corrupt and broken.
Right. It starts with you and your family.
Yeah. There's somebody said to me recently that the revolution will begin around the dinner table.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes.
That's awesome.
And maybe around the podcast table too. So, Lindsey, this has been a blast. Tell people about what's coming next from you, the BirthFit coaching program, like where they can keep up with what you do.
See, I can go off on tangents and not talk about anything.
That's okay. There's many rabbit holes.
Yeah. So BirthFit, if you're interested at all in becoming a BirthFit coach, our waitlist is open. Enrollment will start in March. Early enrollment's March, April, May. If there's still seats available, will be open. We offer the BirthFit coach course once a year because mom life.
Yeah.
And then all of our programs are online. The prenatal training program, the postpartum package. We have a line-in program for the first 30 days because you don't need to be back at the gym or running or any of that during that first month. There's also the BirthFit Basics right on YouTube, or you can do the BirthFit Basics program with us. But we got an awesome community. Like, for instance, Wednesday? So tomorrow we have a monthly support session where women show up, vent, ask questions, modify for movements, or just vent about their husband snoring or whatever. So there's lots.
Don't do that, guys. Don't do that. Mouth tape.
Mouth tape.
That'll stop it.
But yeah, we got an awesome community, women that literally second, third, fourth birth, similar to your wife's story, are choosing to birth in power. And it starts with fitness. It starts with movement, and that builds the trust inside of their bodies, and that carries over into motherhood, into birth and beyond.
Love it.
Yeah.
Lindsey Matthews, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Guys, family, girls, everybody, stay empowered, stay radical. See you next week. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.